If you're here to listen to me throwing down some facts about dogs, may I beg your indulgence for a minute or two? I will get to the dogs, I absolutely promise. Like, don't I always? So today, I'd just like to think about a little form of frustration that's not always on our radar, but one that I see touching the lives of so many of the dogs that we live with, that we work with, and that is the frustration of all of the D's. What are the D's, I hear you ask? Disappointment, downshifts, downgrades, and the termination, a little T there, of all the good stuff. So I really struggled for a title for this session, and I settled on frustration in transition because a lot of this seemed like it was about the transition from one state of really high reinforcement or really valuable stuff to another that wasn't quite so pleasant. And hello, if we've not met before, I'm Emma and I'm a certified canine behaviour consultant working with shelter and rescue in my spare time and with dogs with all of the big feelings in private practice. I live with my dog Liddy, who has all of the big feelings herself. I want to give you some context so that all of the dog concepts will make sense. So I'd like you to imagine teenage me, this is she, some 40 years ago. If my teenage years were characterised by anything, it was music and art. Not just any music though, but massive indie anthems. Like, wasn't everybody's life back then? So one of those anthems that was guaranteed to take me back, that is guaranteed to take me back instantly to my GCSEs, my teenage insecurities, my massive crushes, is a little song from one of Manchester's cooler bands, James. And that song was Sit Down. What a tune. Guaranteed to get 16-year-old me onto the dance floor and pumping my fist in excitement. So today, though, there's a line in the lyrics that I'd like to reflect upon, and that line is this one. If I hadn't seen such riches, I could live with being poor. Like, oh, that line. If I hadn't seen such riches, I could live with being poor. So a miserable, impoverished life would be a tolerable one if I didn't know how good things could be. And there isn't anything, I think, in this world that gets to the heart of frustration in transition like that line. It just gets to this little subset just perfectly. It gets to the heart of disappointment, downshifts, and downregulation that if I hadn't lived with such riches, I could live with being poor. And when we've had the good stuff, when we've had the riches in life, shifting to the bad stuff or simply to the less good stuff, it comes with a bunch of emotions and behaviours that are as true of our dogs as they are of us. So thinking back to that banging tune from the late 80s, it reminds me of one thing that occupied most of my life at that time, which was school. So school was divided into things I absolutely loved and things I absolutely hated, like typical teenager. I loved English, I loved art, I hated geography, I hated chemistry. So now I was two things as a teenager, navigating all of my big feelings about life. Stuff was either amazing and it was brilliant and I was totally in love with it. It was the best thing ever, or it was the absolute pits. It was hell on earth and I despised it mortally to the very marrow of my bones. So my life was filled with riches that made it so much harder to live with being poor. So going from the riches of my art class to the educational wastelands of my geography class, it was a challenge that I'm sure most of you could probably empathise with to some degree or another. Thinking back to your own teenage years where those feelings tend to be heightened, where things are either brilliant and amazing or things are rubbish with very little in between. So imagine, if you will, the 16-year-old Emma on her way to art class. It comes with all of the enthusiasm you'd expect, and you see that through behaviour. So my art teachers would tell you I was diligent, I was conscientious, I was hardworking, I was always on time, I always had the right equipment with me, I always had my homework handed in early, I was an enthusiast, always opting for the optional extra projects. I was chatty, I was open, I was my full weird self. And now imagine the surly, sulking, sullen 16-year-old me on her way to geography class. That comes with all of the reluctance and the hesitation that you would expect. My geography teacher would tell you I was belligerent, I was argumentative, I was difficult. I was the very personification of awkward and uncooperative. I was closed off, I was reluctant, I never volunteered answers, I was never on time. And today we're interested, though, in the shift from one of those classes to the other. The downshifts, if you will, from the good stuff, the art classes, to the bad stuff in life, the geography classes in my case. So the other way round is rarely problematic. So in fact, if art class is contingent upon, if it depends on having done geography first, any good scholar of Ivan Pavlov and David Premack will tell you that that order matters. And if art comes second, I might tolerate my way through geography simply to get to art. So when the good stuff follows the less good stuff, when the less preferred behaviours come first and they're followed by more highly preferred behaviours, it increases the likelihood of those less preferred ones. Like we end up liking the thing that comes first because it predicts the thing that comes second. Upshifts and improvements that follow less valuable events, they do not cause the same kind of frustration. Cause different types of frustration and some, but to a lesser degree. And that's especially true when those two things are predictably paired, where art always follows geography, and the more valuable stuff, art class, depends on the less valuable stuff having happened. But the more predictable the upshift is, the more frustration it can cause if we're really keen that the bad stuff stops and the really good stuff starts. So teenage Emma may get very fidgety and frustrated if geography seems to drag on, or if my geography teacher didn't let me out of class on time. And that's very, very typical frustration, like, let me out of here, I've finished with this. But the other way round is also really frustrating. We don't like to shift from riches to poverty, metaphorically speaking. So going from geography class to art class, that was never an issue for me as long as my geography teacher let me out on time. I'd even be cooperative and polite to that teacher so they wouldn't give me a detention. Like getting into trouble that would delay me from getting to art on time, so it actually altered my behaviour in my geography class. I couldn't very well truant one class either and just opt out completely and then turn up in the next one. That didn't work. So if I had art after geography, no bother whatsoever. And life is like that. We never mind upgrades. Like, who's complaining about the upgrades where the good stuff comes second? Like, who complains if you get booted from economy and you get bumped up to business class? Who complains if you ordered yourself a cheeky glass of Prosecco and the waiter accidentally brings you a bottle of Dom Perignon at the same price? Like, we don't care about the transitions from good to bad, especially where we were expecting them and the bad stuff terminates on time. But the problem is where things happen predictably, where we expect it. So if you book economy and every time you get bumped up from an economy to business class, like a secret extra bonus, you'd be pretty cross if you didn't get bumped up and you still were stuck in economy like you'd paid for. So for expectations and frustration, they go hand in hand. Unexpected upshifts, like the accidental bottle of champagne, doesn't cause the same type of frustration as those expected upshifts when they're delayed or when they don't occur at all. So the way to usually upgrade you from champagne for free when you order Prosecco, you'd probably be pretty disappointed if you didn't do that, especially if you'd paid for Prosecco in economy. The expectations are a big part of frustration, where the good stuff that you're anticipating doesn't come reliably or predictably afterwards, like it's delayed. And order matters, though it always does where feelings and behaviour are concerned. So in fact, the hope that the bad might be followed by the good can be a really strong incentive to get through the bad stuff. Like, I can't be the only one who worked a day job simply to get to the weekend or the holiday break. I've just done 6 weeks of really intense work because I'm hoping to have like 2 weeks off. Am I the only one who eats my main course just because I want to get through to the pudding? Because life is all about the pudding, right? Like, didn't you always wonder why they put the pudding second? I mean, there's literally no reason why the sugary sweet stuff should come second other than culture. I know some nutritionists out there might come along and explain that there's a sense in eating the sugary stuff second and eating certain nutrients before others, and there's biological reasons maybe. But that feels like a retroactive explanation to me to fit the narrative. Sugary fatty desserts come second largely for behavioural and cultural reasons more than they come second for nutritional ones, in my opinion. It's that time-honoured tradition of how parents got their children to eat the boring stuff that's good for you, that doesn't taste very nice, maybe it doesn't when you're young and you're not expecting it to. The promise that better things are going to be the reward. So none of us mind queuing on the outward leg of a holiday as long as we don't miss our flight. But queuing when we come home feels particularly unpleasant because it involves that transition from our great holiday vibes, the riches of life, back to reality, the poverty of life. Like, who wants to come home? Literally nobody, unless you're really, really sick of your holiday. Upshifts, upgrading, and transitions from bad to good, they're really hard unless there's that delay. And we'll race through the bad stuff to get to the good bit, especially if the good bit reliably depends on the bad bit having ended. So Tim Booth did not sing that if he hadn't seen such poverty, he could live with being rich. It's in either the financial or the metaphorical sense. He sang that if he hadn't seen such riches, he could live with being poor. So it's the downshifts, it's the downgrades, it's the transitions from good to bad that are tougher, whether we expect them or whether we don't. It's going from business class and getting bumped down to economy. It's going from the presidential suite you expected and being bumped down to like a twin room. It's going from art to geography, from pudding to Brussels sprouts. And it's exactly the same for many of our dogs. I did tell you I'd get to the dogs. The expected good stuff can cause frustration if it doesn't arrive in a timely fashion. That's fine. Like waiting for a walk that never arrives, that's frustrating. But shifting from the good stuff to the bad stuff can be really problematic. Can be much more problematic, in fact, in my opinion. So like when you see the car or the house at the end of the walk and you know the fun times are over, it's like, oh, I don't want to go back down there right now. You know, you see your guardian turn up at the play date that you're on and you know the good times are over. Oh, why are you here? Disappointment City. And for our dogs, there are plenty of times when they expect to shift from good times to less good ones, and we start to see all kinds of frustration manifest. So if you've got a dog who enjoys an off-lead romp, but they know that if you get that lead out, the off-lead romps are over, so they head for the hills as soon as they see the lead coming out, because they're like, nope, don't want to go home yet, I'm not quite ready. And you might know a dog whose recall fails when they get to a predictable point in the walk where they're like, oh, every time she calls me back here, she puts me on the lead and we go home. I don't want that to happen because they know the walk is over. So maybe their recall fails when they're playing with a friend, like, oh, I know what that means. I'm not going back there, because they know the only time you call them is when it's time to go home. And there's plenty of trainers out there who call these things poisoned cues. That's not exactly what they are. They're just the good stuff following and we're anticipating the good stuff is going to be over. So the riches of those events make it even harder to tolerate the metaphorical poverty of whatever it is that's about to happen. And I see that so often at the dog field, the secure dog field that I use, not always, and that tells us something. Particularly when I'm behind one guy who never leaves the field on time. Like he spends a good 10 minutes calling his dog back, chasing his dog around the field, cajoling his dog, trying to bribe his dog, getting crosser and crosser. And his dog's like, nope, I know exactly what you're trying to do, that you want to put me in that car and I want to go home. Not today, thank you. I'm still filling my boots on this good stuff. And many of you might feel that this, if you've got a dog who enjoys training sessions, particularly if you're using food and toys and it's like a really highly reinforcing time for that dog. Maybe they love agility and you can't get them out of the ring. Maybe they're huge fans of tennis balls and putting a ball away at the end of the session is likely to cause all kinds of frustration. I certainly know dogs who bark in frustration at their guardian the moment treat pouches go away or they end a training session. Like, oh no, does it have to stop? I'm enjoying this. I was having so much fun. And particularly if they're young and they don't have very good frustration coping skills. And that's when we see the frustration appear. And I see that so often in dogs who don't have those skills yet. So we remember that frustration manifests in four main ways, four main groups of behaviour. The first way is in persistent behaviours that get bigger, more frequent, more intense, like barking at you even more or even longer to carry on the training session. Or they're just staging a sit-in at the back of the dog field and they're going to sit there for as long as it takes. We might also see our dogs switch tack and try something different. That's the invention, especially if persistent behaviour fails. Like the dog who's then going to suddenly turn and run away instead of staging that sit-in because they can see you coming towards them with a lead. And then they suddenly start maybe mouthing you or jumping up on you because you've asked them to leave that space. Like we might see that at the end of agility. That creativity can also include aggression, including redirected aggression. So the third thing that we're likely to see are displacement behaviours. So those are those out of context behaviours that don't seem to fit into the context of what's going on in a moment, particularly autonomic ones, things that the body can't help doing, like sneezing or snorting, huffing and chuffing, sniffing, peeing, those kind of things. And we're going to see distancing behaviours as part of that displacement, like the dog's going to move further away. And finally, we're going to see quitting, maybe trying something different, a little bit of invention there sometimes, and acquiescence, like I'm just giving up, I'm going to put up with it. So today we're going to spend a little time thinking about switching from good stuff to bad stuff, whatever we might think of as downgrading or downshifting, like me moving from art class and going to geography class. So this involves the reduction or the termination in quality or quantity of reinforcers, things that are valuable to us in that moment. And those reinforcers can include things like sensory stimulation, like doing all the dog stuff for our dogs, sniffing, swimming, running, chasing, biting, playing, eating. Thinking about me in art class, it's very obviously drawing and painting. It can include things that are tangible, objects, things like beds and toys. We don't like to give those up. It can include interactions and social activities, like I liked the people in my art class. And that can include switches from safety or stimulation to less certainty or boring times. Certainly that happened to me when I went into geography class. So whenever we got downshifts that move from a highly valued reinforcer or reinforcers to something that's less valuable, it's not unusual for us to see frustration. And we might see that even if it's not, a massive disappointment, or it's just a small shift. So we might see it if we're going from art class, the highly valued class, to the one that's slightly less valuable. Maybe that's English, or maybe that was something else. For me, that I would have had that little bit of, oh, my art class is over, this is the end of that good stuff. But that's obviously not going to be as dramatic as going into the class that I really didn't like. So that also provides for us a little bit of a solution there, that those staged downshifts can be a little bit more tolerable to manage than the ones that are really, really dramatic. And when we think about that with our dog, were I trying to get that dog out of the dog field, I would want to maybe do some things that were like less incrementally dramatic. There was less of a divide between those things, rather than that dog who I imagine just goes home, maybe has a bath, or maybe there's something really unpleasant that dog really doesn't like afterwards, and it will make it a little bit easier for that dog to go and do something else, like have a smaller walk, and then go home and have the shower afterwards. So we start to see some of the solutions when we understand the problems. And this kind of frustration is all around us. So think, for instance, of dogs who are really enjoying their walk, like walk, best day ever. And then you ask them to shift from free and varied sniffing, fill your boots, and environmental engagement, however they want to interact with the world, to having to walk like right next to you. You've got riches to metaphorical poverty. Or you think of that dog who's really enjoying their game of tug with you, and then you decide you're going to be late for work if you carry on. You'd love to do that all day. So you put the toy under your arm, you walk back to the house only to find the dog trying to grab the toy, nipping at your arm, trying to hold on to those last valuable moments of their riches. Maybe think about the dogs as well who enjoy the social interactions. And maybe they've been enjoying having your cousin Sandra around and her dogs. But then when everybody looks like they're leaving and packing up to leave, you find your dog's blocking your exit, blocking the way out, getting into a scrap maybe. You see some redirected aggression, maybe some mouthing, maybe some jumping, maybe the things that we think of as over arousal, maybe even a slinking off to their bed like you've just told them that Christmas is cancelled and life is no longer worth living anymore. So we find downshift as well, where we see dogs move from certain safety into relative uncertainty and the potential danger that comes with that. And that can also cause some frustration. So some dogs I work with who struggle with anxiety are very reluctant to go outside of the house into the great unknown. Like that's outside is where the bad stuff happens, or sometimes happens. So the riches in this case will be your dog's very well defended castle, comfy, nice, pleasant, safe. And the metaphorical poverty is the land beyond, like here be dragons. And it needn't be anything dramatic. Like I touched on that when I talked about the shift from art class to geography class, because my art teachers and created a very safe environment in that art class. I have got stories where you learned through experience that my art teachers were incredibly safe people to be around. kind of emotionally speaking, psychologically speaking, and my geography teacher wasn't that safety and didn't offer that, didn't provide that kind of environment. So it doesn't need to be anything like really here be dragons outside the door. It can just be those small shifts where it just feels less comfortable to go from something that feels really pleasant to go and do something that feels less pleasant. Like, who'd want to go and do that? Not me. And all of these involve downshifts. So where these are predictable and happen relatively regularly, like on a timetable in school, it's not unusual to find frustration there. And this is also the case when the individual hasn't had their fill yet of whatever it was that they were doing or accessing. And it's really worth, I think, reiterating that point. So where animals and humans and young Emmas have their fill of champagne or art class or whatever, there isn't as much frustration caused in that downshift. But it is part of life where we have to give up the good stuff almost before we're ready to move on. Like Sunday finishes too quickly, doesn't it? Christmas Day, it can't last forever. We need to go back to work or school eventually. Holidays can't last forever, much as we might love that to happen. And as much as our dog might want to walk and sniff and run until their legs fall off, there are times when that doesn't fit our schedule, where it's not possible, where it's actually even harmful for the dog to do it, where it might be unhealthy for the dog. And it might struggle with this, particularly if they're younger, they haven't got frustration coping skills yet, and less well able to regulate their feelings of frustration. So these scenarios, they all involve two states, two comparable states. The rich state, which is replete with the reinforcers that are valuable to us in the moment, and then the poor state, that by its very nature is less than what you had. And where two states can be compared, especially where they're very contextually different and they feel different, we call that contrast. Good stuff, bad stuff, it can be contrasted. And when it alters our emotions and behaviour, we call that the effect of the contrast. And where it's a bad effect, we might call that a negative contrast effect, like it tails off. And this is the term that we'd be using if we wanted to dig into the research about this phenomenon, negative contrast effects, going from good to bad. The negative contrast effect, that's if I hadn't lived with such riches, I could live with being poor. So if you're looking for more research on this topic, that is the term that you'd use, negative contrast effect. So now you understand why I prefer to think of it as if I hadn't seen such riches behaviour. Like, who's got time to remember negative contrast effects? No one would know what I meant by that, but I think everybody understands the significance of that lyric from that band. It's very resonant with us because we understand what it is to have had to go from Sunday afternoon with your family and a barbecue to having to go back to work if you don't like work on a Monday morning. And while negative contrast effects have existed for as long as animals have had emotion states in history, they were really only identified in the 1930s. So the granddaddy of purposive behaviorism, Edward Tolman, he was surprised to find a monkey who, when offered lettuce instead of the banana that they were expecting, they'd been having banana, they were enjoying the banana, they were expecting banana, they threw the lettuce on the floor, even though they normally like lettuce well enough. That they'd rather go without the lettuce when they expected the highly valued reinforcer. So they got that unexpected downshift. They were expecting a banana, they got lettuce. And the result, that monkey said, I'd rather die than have the lettuce. I would rather not eat. I would rather get really angry and move away from the situation. One of the typical things we'd expect to see with frustration. And I really would rather not have the lettuce at all. That lettuce is going right there on the floor. In fact, I had this very scenario with Liddy. I don't often cheat her. I didn't mean to cheat her. I had it the other day. We went to her treat cupboard and I just peeled a banana for me. And Liddy likes banana well enough and usually accepts it. In fact, when I have a banana, she'll sit behind me waiting for some of it. I've never known her spit banana out. But when I gave her the banana, she was expecting like one of the nasty dog treats from the treat drawer. She spat that banana out like it was the most disgusting thing I could ever have given her. Like, nope, I'd rather not. It's not what I was expecting. Prediction error. Unexpected item in the bagging area. So she then huffed back into the living room without any treat whatsoever. I had to call her back, give her the most abject of apologies. Like, I was like, oh, what have I done? I thought I was just giving you a bit of banana whilst I got your treat out. I thought you were going to have two things. P.S. By the way, she spat the banana out. I left it on the floor because I knew she was going to come back and eat it after she'd had her treat. But not getting the quality or the quantity we expect can be both disappointing and frustrating. But the negative contrast effect is not just about things getting unexpectedly worse, like a prediction error, unexpected item in the bagging area that's unpleasant. It's not just about that. It's also about shifting from doing the good thing, having a run of the good thing, to doing the less good thing. We get frustration there too, and we get that negative contrast effect there too. The termination of the good stuff, when the good stuff ends. And once Edward Tolman noticed this phenomenon, that a hungry monkey would refuse lettuce if they expected bananas, other researchers then started exploring this phenomenon themselves. And there's a bunch of research on lots of other species, mainly on humans, it transpires, because we do not like downshifts, we do not like disappointment, we do not like delay. We do not like to go from art class to geography to be bumped down from business to economy when we're not expecting it. And we don't like it if we turn up at the car rental having ordered a luxury four-seater to be given the tiniest car imaginable. And we definitely don't like it if we're enjoying a certain standard of a thing and then that standard deteriorates. If that happens at work, many of us will be in a union and would go on strike over it. We don't even like relative downshifts like inflation. I can't even begin to tell you how much I wept the other day to go I went into my instant cheap coffee because coffee beans had started to get really expensive, and I was thinking I would save a little bit of money, and I cried into my coffee. Like, I'd rather have water. I'd rather not have a drink at all, actually. Thanks very much, than drink that whatever it was. It was so much worse though, because I switched abruptly from the really good coffee that I enjoy to practically the cheapest in the shop because I thought I was going to save myself £5 whatever. I should have phased down. I should have done it gradually. But worse, I grew up dirt poor. I did not have good tea and I did not have good coffee, and I didn't have that until I was in my 30s. Like, all the way through university, I just drank water because it was free. And I think I really only started with the proper stuff when I got a little bit of flexible income. So I'm probably only 15 or 20 years into my real coffee journey, that successful learning history of reinforcement. But if I hadn't seen such riches, I could live with being poor. It'd be much less frustrating if I'd stayed on the cheap instant coffee the whole time. I wouldn't have been crying into it, I imagine, with disappointment, like, what is this? It's like my life is over. That's for sure. And no, I am no different from that monkey that threw Tolman's lettuce on his lettuce gift. It was an additional thing that the monkey did not expect. Threw it on the floor because they'd been living off bananas and that was what they expected. And my dog Liddy, exactly the same. Like, she's used to the same quality treats at snack time. You can keep your sucky bananas as long as she was expecting a high class treat. Bananas are fine as long as she's expecting a banana, as long as she knows that that's what comes next. Bananas are not fine when she expects a high class treat. Now, research on negative contrast effects in dogs has given mixed results. So you don't see a very clear trend when it comes to dogs. And this is unusual because negative contrast effects exist in many other species that have been tested for it. Parrots, they don't like downgrades or disappointments in general. Monkeys don't, rats don't. Pigeons tolerate it, it's surprising to me. Starlings don't. So some effects on some studies in dogs have suggested there is an effect on dogs' behaviour when they don't get what they're expecting, when there's unexpectedly shifted from the good stuff to the less good stuff. And other studies have suggested that they didn't see that effect, that they didn't see any kind of negative contrast effect. So why might that be, that it's so contradictory and so, we've got such division between the studies that saw that effect in dogs and the studies that didn't? Well, for me, I think that many dogs in general are learn to be pretty tolerant of variety and reinforcers. Like, many dogs, especially those who live in families that get to take part in studies on university campuses, they tend to have varied and reinforcing lives. Like, sure, you might miss that one bus, but another bus is going to come along sooner or later. They tend not to have those rigidly predictable lives. Varied opportunities for reinforcing activities are frequent, and that's a really good way to inoculate our dogs against negative contrast effects. They get used to surprise in both directions, like unexpectedly good stuff and unexpectedly bad stuff. And they tolerate the unexpected bad stuff because on balance, life is full of good stuff for them. Good stuff will happen eventually to them. And maybe, who knows, pigeons feel the same about life. I don't know what pigeons think. But this is not to say that all dogs tolerate it. And that's why researchers have come to contradictory conclusions, in my opinion, when it comes to dogs. So what we can't do is say that downshifts in quality have got no impact on canine behaviour, because it might be true of some dogs, but it's not true of all dogs. So now our next question is why some dogs cope better when there are downshifts and other dogs don't, and what we can do about it if our dog does struggle when the good stuff is reduced, or when it ends, or when they don't get the good quality good stuff that they were expecting. So what does it mean for us if our dogs are sensitive to downshifts? Well, the first thing is that they can be very sensitive to reinforcement thinning or reinforcement ending in training sessions. So, say you've been rewarding your dog's efforts to sit quietly on a mat when you're on a Zoom call, and then you're very human. You start to feel a bit resentful of the time it takes you to set out all a bunch of reinforcers for them, or you don't have the time or the inclination, or you feel like they should just have got the hang of being quiet by now while you're working. So, for dogs who do struggle with those downshifts and downgrades or the termination of the good stuff, they're going to struggle more with you thinning out the good stuff than the average dog on the street. And it's also going to make a difference whether they've learned that and had that history whilst they've been growing up. So a friend of mine, she's adopted a rescue dog. We know the situation, the home that the rescue dog came from. It's just a busy family home. They didn't really have time for the dog. So it's kind of like a pre-loved dog rather than a rescue dog. But she started, he pulled a little bit on lead, and she started to work with him on his lead training skills and some other skills in the house. But what's happened, because he's a really smart little spaniel, he started barking at her at the end of the training sessions because he doesn't like that it's over. And I think this is probably quite frequent with people who are working with puppies who are quite intolerant of reinforcement thinning or reinforcement ending, and also people who've adopted rescue dogs, especially where they haven't always got the skills to know how to phase those things out and not to cause so much frustration. Like, it was quite an easy fix for this rescue dog. We've just simply faded things out. We've done a little bit of scatter feeding. That always helps because reinforcement thins itself naturally there. We've done some shifts, and we've moved from like the highly reinforcing valuable things. We've actually started asking for some duration behaviors. Just like offering those, so sometimes I'll go and find a toy and pick that up and wander around with that, and so he naturally is bringing it to the end himself. So that's really useful. But I can imagine how many people get frustrated with reinforcement-based training because they've got dogs who don't know about reinforcement-based training either. And they haven't necessarily got the skills to know, what do I do when I've got a dog who doesn't like it when the training session ends? Because they lived in a state of relative poverty for a long time. That dog never had training. That dog never had extra sausages and things that came out of the bowl. And now he's learned about them. And it's like, I don't want to give these up. I want you to keep going. And especially because he learned really, really quickly that barking at my friend got her to carry on the training session. And so now he's like, nope, I'm not ready to quit. So the training session at where she was when she called me was just carrying on until the dog was ready to quit the training session, which was sometimes quite a long time. And luckily she was able to cope with that and to deal with that. But she wanted to know, how does she make it less frustrating? Because nobody wants to live with a dog who's frustrated. And yes, she's got a dog who seems to be hungry for training and seems to be really enjoying it and seems to be like highly motivated, what we might think of as a high drive dog. But then that asks us to ask the question, if we have a dog that we think of as highly motivated or high drive, is it just that they don't regulate their frustration very well when the good stuff ends? So it seems to be that the dog wants to continue doing what we'd think of as work behaviors or task-based behaviors, simply because we don't recognize that they don't want to switch to lying on the couch again. What you're doing is giving them sausages and switching their brain on and helping them learn and connecting with them and interacting with them. Why would they want that to end? And so some dogs are of course going to struggle with that. So rapid reinforcement thinning and things coming to an end can be particularly problematic, I think, for some young puppies who don't have those skills, and for some adult dogs when they come into a home, especially if we're not mindful of this concept and we're not mindful of how we overcome it. And some of these dogs get labeled pushy or bossy or dominant or whatever word we like to apply to them because they're simply sensitive to downshifts that can trap us, the humans, into patterns of rigidity because their frustration alters our behaviour. So, for instance, because we know that our dog might not be able to wait very long after they've been awake for the walk that they're expecting or for meal times, we tend to become quite rigid in our routines with them to help them manage their frustration. And this is problematic if we need to deviate from that predictability because the dog can really struggle with it. So perhaps we've had some really hot weather recently, and maybe you've noticed a dog who struggles with that kind of frustration over the riches ending. They can really, or the riches not arriving, they can really struggle if they don't go out on their daily walk at the same time that you normally take them, or if their dog walkers had to cancel walks because of the temperatures. And what frustrated dogs really need is variety. That's the antidote, but they don't cope with that variety very well, and we worse than that by getting trapped in patterns of rigidity. So we tend to become very rigid to help manage their frustration, and that's hugely counterproductive because variability is the antidote, not rigidity. They can also become highly reliant on a very narrow basket of things that they enjoy in that moment. So, if you're used to traveling in business class, getting on a bus or a regional train and having to accept lower quality modes of transport can be a real challenge. Like, we tend to shape ourselves into a more limited range of the things that are rewarding to us, but when they're no longer available, and it dramatically not available, can get really, really tough. So ironically, I did this accidentally with my hens and also with my first cat. Lesson learned. Because I leaned into the things my hens and my cat would eat or not, they actually tended to end up with quite a limited diet. And this then traps us both because they wouldn't tolerate downshifts. So this is my cat Basil, my first cat. He refused to eat like a load of foods and a load of brands. And he ended up on, and it was very, very specific, Whiskers fish flavoured meat in jelly. Nothing but Whiskers, nothing but fish flavoured, nothing but in jelly. Not beef, not gravy, not rabbit, not chicken, not other brands. Definitely not supermarket own brand. Like, how very dare I offer him that? And he would refuse to eat it for days. And my hens, they had mixed feed, but they'd quite often pick out the corn. They were quite selective eaters. So I ended up feeding them a more high ratio of corn, which was fine until the day that the store had no bags of corn one day. And my hens were like, well, what am I going to eat then? And it just became a massive hen drama. Likewise, both hens and cats were used to free roaming, and at times they had to be shut in. They experienced a lot of frustration because they couldn't access the kind of rewards that they expected to access at that time. So living with animals who struggle with negative contrast effects can be much more troublesome than a dog who just spits out banana because like that was not the sweet treat they were expecting. They may struggle with recall. We may struggle in lots of other ways on walks with them. We might struggle if they refuse to get out of the car, for instance, or refuse to give up an item. We might struggle with frustration if we end a training session or any other reinforcing time that the dog is enjoying, like being in the dog park. Lots of situations that involve the potential downshift from those riches to that metaphorical poverty can also end really badly for our dogs. Many cases that I think of when I think of resource guarding, I think they could better be categorized as sensitivity to anticipated downshifts. Like, oh, I'm going to have to share now and I don't want to share. Why would I want to share? They were previously enjoying sole access to it. So I can certainly remember my dog Heston. He struggled when other dogs wanted to enjoy playing with a certain lady dog friend that he really adored. Like, I won't even tell you about the time my elderly Malinois Toby fell deeply and passionately and obsessively in love with a young puppy and wouldn't even tolerate a downshift to eat or drink or sleep for even a second. So it can become really problematic. And I think we have in the past tended to categorize that as resource guarding, as fear-based behavior, when really, when we ask the question, does the dog have something or anticipate having something that is going to be downshifted or have to share, or the quality of that is going to be disrupted because of the arrival of another individual? then we start to see, oh, this is more about frustration, sensitivity, and not wanting to give up that resource more than it is about fear, or more than it is about anything that we might class as resource guarding. So for some dogs, it's also about transitions from having exclusive access to a valued or enjoyable resource or an activity or a reinforcer, to moving to sharing it or having it taken away from them completely. And that can be very frustrating. That's a really potent type of downshift, isn't it? And there you were enjoying things, and here comes some other creature to end your fun or to make you share. And that's how I felt, quite frankly, when my sister came along when I was 6 and she was 2. I was enjoying everything, and there's this baby, this moving thing that's now taking all of the things, that reducing my quality and quantity of access to the things that I loved, and starting to make me want to share my toys and so on. So I think this is a very useful way of considering what we might think of typically as resource guarding. Like, is it really resource guarding, or is it the appearance of another individual, like there's that damn baby again, simply a cue that predicts that your exclusive access to a thing is probably going to end? Or now you're going to have to keep an eye on them, and you can't really your attention is having to be shared between keeping an eye on the potential threat and enjoying the thing that you're wanting to do. So often when people tell me that their dog is guarding a resource, or doesn't want to share with them, or doesn't want to share that with another individual, be that a partner, a child, a dog, a cat, or whatever, I'm interested in how that dog is coping with downshifts in other areas of their life, as a result of having to share, because that can be a very specific situation, or more generally. Like, sharing by its very nature means a degradation in the quality or the quantity of the things that you would rather enjoy yourself. Like, if I'm eating a nice piece of cake, a nice sweet treat, and somebody starts approaching me and I've got a history of doing it, and I know they're going to come, oh, we're going to have a little try. No, if you want your own, go get your own. This one is mine. And we wouldn't necessarily categorize that as resource guarding. What it is a frustration that every time I see that person, they come over with their little dirty fingers trying to sample my product. And I see that sometimes with dogs. It can be a human being that is the person that caused the sharing or the degradation in quality, or it can be another animal. So for instance, I certainly know dogs who don't want to share their bed space, and it's like, no, I was enjoying this myself, and now here along you come. Or they're enjoying playing, or sometimes they're enjoying smelling and they've got exclusive access to a smell, and then here comes some other dog to and they have to also share their attention by keeping the focus on what the other dog is doing rather than dedicating their attention to whatever it is they're doing. And I'm thinking as well about my dog Heston. Every night, about after tea time, when everything was over and the day was done, he would pop himself off to bed, maybe about 7 o'clock. Quite often I'd be working or doing things online and I'd be talking, so I was noisy, creating a little noisy environment, and he would go into the sanctity, the silence of the bedroom, and he would tuck himself between the bed and the wall, and he would get some sleep in. But then when I would go to bed and all the other dogs would come with me, Heston would be like, I'm not staying in here then, and go back in the living room. It's the most offensive thing ever. But when I think about that, what was happening there was that degradation of the quality, the sound of silence that he was enjoying very much, enjoying in my bedroom. And then here come the others to destroy that, and he doesn't have exclusive access to that beautiful, silent, comfortable space anymore. And so he just transfers that. We don't see any problematic behavior with that, just a little bit of disappointment on my behalf that my dog seems to not like being in a bedroom with me, and my other dogs. He prefers the space of his own. And so often I would think we don't even notice that going on in our dogs' lives, and then wondering why it would be problematic. Like, certainly if I'd got foster dogs who then would follow Heston and go into the living room with him, Heston's like, no dude, I want to sleep, I want to have exclusive access to this silent space and exclusive access to this couch and even this room. And you can see that might become problematic. So often what I think of when we see resource guarding is we need to ask that question about whether the approach of another individual, the appearance of another individual, has become a learned cue that the good times are going to have to be shared, or the good times are over, or you're going to have to share your attention, because now you can't just pay exclusive attention to the thing that you're enjoying, and you've now got to share it by keeping your eye on something else. So I think we might be thinking about this and having a little bit of a light bulb moment, going, oh, that's actually more to do with the degradation of the resources that the dog is enjoying, or the things they think they might be enjoying, that they just don't want somebody else to come and share it. Who'd want that? And this is one reason I'm very interested in negative contrast effects, and those anticipated, the ones you know about, the ones you predict, or unexpected downshifts. We get all kinds of problematic behaviour at such time. So I'm currently working with a shelter dog who refuses to go back in kennels at the end of the walk. And of course, that's really sad, knowing that the end of relative riches is nigh. Like, I know what happens now. It can be really hard for many dogs, especially if there's a big difference in how reinforcing one event is compared to the aversiveness of the thing that follows. So we also have the questions of why this is going on and what to then do about it. And there are many reasons why a dog might be less ordinary when it comes to how they cope with downgrades and downshifts. Developmental periods are critical. There's a very good reason I had to hark back to my teenage years to think about times when, my life is over because I've got to go from art class to geography class. I'm very much more tolerant of downshifts as an adult, even if I do cry into my instant coffee when I remember the beans that I've loved in the past. Infancy and adolescence are two of those times when it gets a little bit harder. Like, who wants to cope with going back to school when it's been Christmas or it's been the summer holidays? And the better your Christmas or summer holidays were, and the worse school is, the harder it is to return to school. Like, I had very long and boring school holidays as a child, so I was delighted to get back to school and see all of my friends and end the relative boredom and all of the tasks I had to do and the chores and the work and stuff. But I know it's not always the same for those people who were lucky enough to have access to highly reinforcing holidays. Adolescence is also a time when we're much more sensitive to aversive or unpleasant or even just boring events and activities, because we're seeking out sensory stimulation. Plus, we're coupled with less speedy regulatory skills, meaning adolescence can be a factor in why dogs might be very sensitive to downshifts. But we forget as well, I think, that there can be disappointments associated with old age. We may be less tolerant of these if we're in pain, or our health isn't the best, or we're just losing our regulatory skills as we age. Our regulatory skills can be impaired, meaning that we might express our frustration or disappointment differently than we would have done earlier in adulthood. I'm thinking of some of my elderly relatives who've had moments where quite, the ones that we'd all kind of laugh about, really, that are really just quite sad. People who are living in medical facilities or in sheltered accommodation because they are aging and they need support with their health, and then can be quite disappointed by my nana crying because her tea was slightly colder than she would drink it at home. I've watched that woman leave cups of tea on the side for a very long time and drink it cold. She'd lived with that disappointment in her life, but then as she aged, she just didn't have the regulatory skills, and she's also got poor health and so on, just can't tolerate that anymore. And I imagine we find quite a lot of that frustration in care facilities for people who are aging. So I think we forget that our regulatory skills and our ability to regulate our emotions, our behavior, and our social interactions fades when we get older as well, especially where there are health concerns. We just get a little bit more snappy, don't we? We get a little bit more irritable. I don't know what I'm bragging about. I'm crying in my coffee. Traits also affect our dog's ability to cope with downshifts in reinforcer quality or quantity. So traits are just stable aspects of personality that reflect how we cope with life in general across different contexts. We can't spend like 3,000 years specifically selecting for dogs who are highly sensitive to life's rewards and then start moaning that they seem really sensitive when they get downshifts. Like, we spend generations selecting dogs for what we think of as high drive behaviours, as work behaviours, and then we're wondering why they're less especially sensitive to reinforcers, and why they don't want to come off the sheep field or out of the dog agility park, why they don't want to tolerate less. So, along with heritable traits and developmental periods, another thing that really affects how our dogs cope with downshifts is early learning and experience. So, unfortunately for some dogs, the first time that they encounter certain environmentally, biologically, ancestrally relevant reinforcers, they sensitize. First time a gun dog sees a bird flying, making the whole experience particularly rewarding. I'm thinking here of a collie I'm working with at the moment. He's so sensitized to cars and children in the first 2 weeks of life in his home that any attempts to move him on from herding children or chasing cars was incredibly frustrating. He's using redirected aggression to share that frustration, not least because he was a baby and didn't yet have the regulatory skills to cope with that downshift to a more ordinary life. Like, who wants to live with chasing a tug toy when you could be chasing a car? Early experiences from birth to 8 weeks, they also set the blueprint for how well dogs will be able to regulate their behavior, their cognition, their emotions, meaning that they simply might not yet have had the best start in life to help them cope when life gets inevitably disappointing from time to time. They may really struggle to cope with any kind of emotional experience that they find unpleasant, be it fear, be it frustration, be it disappointment. And these tend to be the major contributory factors that explain why some dogs cope like a boss with downshifts and downgrades, and other dogs don't. But what do we do about it if our dog is especially sensitive to living poor after they've lived rich? What do we do with our shelter dog who doesn't want to go back into kennels, with our collie who wants to chase cars, with our spaniels who are barking at their owners for more training, please? There are lots of approaches that we can take with dogs to help them build resilience and to help them cope with life's major inconveniences and minor ones. Truth be told, sometimes we're all in the red and sometimes we're in the black when it comes to their bank account. And life is boring sometimes when it comes to our metaphorical life account. Life is sucky sometimes. Life is tedious and monotonous at times. It's filled with things we'd rather not do. It's not always a life in the pink, filled with champagne and business class upgrades. Also, we habituate to business class, and then any kind of inconvenience can be disappointing for us. So it's not good to habituate to the good stuff. Sometimes there are geography classes to go to. Sometimes you've got to leave the dog part before you're quite ready for it. And learning to cope with that is something that we can help our dogs with in so many, many different ways. If you're looking for ideas, there's some in the comments. You'll find the frustration assessment and audit, helping you understand your dog's individual profile when it comes to coping. You'll also find a free webinar giving you 30 solutions to canine frustration. And I always have a solution every 2 minutes. It's like a frantic rush through all of the solutions. You can also find a free webinar to help you build frustration tolerance from puppyhood as well. That's coming. And if you work with dogs in a professional capacity, I created the frustration masterclass especially for you. It was 36 lectures delivered over 12 weeks. You'll find out everything that you ever thought you needed to know about frustration and then some. It's your literal one-stop shop for all things canine frustration. If that sounds too chunky and too much, there's also a 5-hour crash course that covers all of the basics in much, much more detail so that you not only recognize situations that are frustrating for dogs, but you also know how to work to both reduce frustration effectively and how to build up frustration tolerance too, two muscles for the same outcome. But what I can't do, though, is help you cope with the inevitable disappointment once you enter the final session of those things. That's on you. So I really hope that you find the next steps assuage some of that frustration now. So let me know how you get on.